Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event today at Solihull CAVA and Warwickshire CAVA. We will meet the founder with two wonderful ladies from Groundwork West Midlands, Raissa and Michelle, who will talk to us about the European Social Fund as well as the Tesco Community Grants. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to arrive, just a couple of minutes. And in the meantime, if you would like to introduce yourselves in the chat, that would be wonderful, so we know who you are and you can exchange with other groups in the area. My name is Aline Boblin. I am the delivery manager south for CAVA, covering Stratford district and covering Solihull. And as I said, today we have Raissa and Michelle talking to us about two funds that are supported by and managed by Groundwork West Midlands. And we're still missing a few people. This event is being recorded, so bear that in mind if you prefer to put your camera on off. Right, I think everybody has now joined our meeting. So again, good morning, everyone. It is great to see you all for this event organised by CAVA in Warwickshire and Solihull. My name is Aline Boblin. I am the deputy manager, the delivery manager for CAVA here in Solihull and in Stratford district as well. And today we have Raissa and Michelle talking to us about the European Social Fund as well as the Tesco Community Grants, which are both administered by Groundwork. So what we're going to talk about today so first of all, this meeting is being recorded. So remember to switch off your video if you prefer to do so, and keep your microphone on mute during the presentations. There will be plenty of time to ask questions after each of the presentations on each of those funds. It would be fantastic if you want to introduce yourselves for a little bit of networking using the chat functionality, and as well as ask any questions you have, comments and networking information you want to share again using the chat function. Both the three presentations that are being shared with you today, the CAVA presentation as well as the Groundwork presentations, will be sent to you after this event. So a little bit about CAVA before we start. CAVA is let me just put that, there we go. CAVA is the community and voluntary action organisation that supports Warwickshire County Council and Solihull Council for their initiative with the voluntary community and social enterprise structures within our regions. And we provide support to a whole breadth of organisations, from non-incorporated groups all the way through to incorporated charities as well as community interest companies. The base of our work, the core side of our work, is to ensure your organisation can engage with volunteers as well as to direct volunteers and interested volunteering organisations towards the groups that you support. And we also support groups to develop their structures, to develop their governance, as well as access funding and identify potential funding streams for your projects as well. If you want to know which organisation members are right for your group in your area, please contact us using this link. We're actually based into a number of areas within Warwickshire County Council and Solihull. And as you can see here, we have offices in a number of those districts. And for each of those areas, we have a volunteering coordinator, as well as a funding and group development officer. And just for Solihull, we also have a relationship officer at present. Now, we would very strongly encourage you to join our membership. CAVA is itself a charity, and the strength of our membership is what allows us to represent your sector and to represent you with our local authorities, and to demonstrate not just the volume of organisation that exists, but also the breadth of the support you bring to your communities. At the same time, this free membership also has some benefits, as you can see on the screen. And if you have any questions on those, feel free to contact me, or feel free to contact anyone specifically into your area and locality. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Raisa Aziz, who will talk to us about the European Social Fund.
Thank you. Can we see that okay?
Yes, absolutely, no problem. And feel free, everyone, to ask your questions and monitor the questions in the chat. And Raisa will answer those after her presentation.
Okay, hello and welcome, everyone. So today I will be talking to you about the ESF community grants, which have been running since 2019, and they're going to be going on till 2023. So what is the ESF community grants? So the ESF community grants are small pots of funding that are offered to organisations in the voluntary and community sector, and the whole purpose is to kind of help people over the age of 18 to move into employment or further education, and to provide them with the sort of skills so that they can move back into society again, especially if they've been out for a prolonged period of time. So the grants are funded by the European Social Fund and the Education and Skills Funding Agency, and they're managed by Coventry and Warwickshire by Groundwork. So our role as Groundwork is to promote the fund, so to look for organisations which offer services in that sort of area, or organisations we think could benefit from the funding to kind of move the projects forward. We assess applications and allocate the grant funding. So in terms of assessing applications, we looked at things like, do they have a route of helping the participants to move into progression, and if they don't progress, what sort of mechanisms do they have in place? And in terms of recruiting participants, do they already have a route that they can pursue where they know that they'll have a decent amount of people that are eligible for the project? Ensuring grant recipients and participants are eligible, paying out the grants, supporting the project, so again through the likes of myself as the grant enabler, and monitoring the projects and reporting back to the ESFA. So the total amount of funding that's available is 1.64 million, and then organisations apply for the amount of funding that they think they will need, and it varies between £5,000 and £20,000. On average, you see most organisations applying for around the £18,000–19,000 mark. The project runs for 6 months. However, there is some flexibility with this. So particularly because of COVID, a lot of organisations have needed an extension on their projects because it just wasn't feasible to recruit the participants that they had intended. And as long as they put in a change in request form, this tends to be accepted. So in terms of eligibility, grants are for third sector organisations or small organisations with under 49 employees and a turnover of less than 8.6 million. Grants must fund projects delivered within Coventry and Warwickshire. So although the organisations can be based outside Coventry and Warwickshire, the projects have to be running within this area. Projects must support unemployed or economically inactive individuals aged 18 plus to progress towards employment. Some organisations want to do the whole 16 to 18, however, the ESF funding is only for 18 plus. There are certain priority groups which are preferred to be targeted, and they include the over 50s, those with disabilities, people of ethnic minorities, and women. Participants should be unemployed, ideally for 6 months plus, or inactive and aged, like I mentioned, over the age of 18. So in terms of progression, there's 2 main routes which participants can go into, and that's either to go into employment or to go into some sort of formal education or training. And this will vary depending on the sort of services each organisation is offering and their target group in terms of age. Usually the breakdown is 14% go into training and 17% go into employment. So the types of activities that projects can run are engagement activities. So for example, visiting colleges to raise awareness and increase participant familiarity with a more formal setting. Confidence, motivation and social integration. So I've come across projects which, for example, have offered things around music, and the whole aim of this is maybe to help people realize a new interest, just to get them back into society and help them to realize a route that they can go down. Development, so local groups and networks to support people to get a job or access learning. Removing barriers, so the projects, some of them can be more targeted at the soft skills, so anger management, assertiveness and motivation, helping people to gain those skills again, which will give them the confidence and make them more suited for a work or education environment. And then there's innovative approaches, so new approaches to attracting underrepresented groups into learning. So the process of making an application, so the first thing would be to have a look through the application guidance. This is a very thorough piece, a thorough document, and it details all the information in terms of what you can and can't spend the money on, who the grant is for, the processes involved. So that would be the first protocol. The next step would be, after that, people may contact the grant enabler, and then we will refer them on to the eligibility checker. If they are deemed eligible, then they'll be sent directly to the application form. Then the next step is assessment that goes to the grant panel and due diligence. And then once it's decided that they will receive the funding, there's a mandatory briefing that they attend. They receive 40%, which is the first payment, and then they can start delivering their project. The whole process from steps 1 to 9 usually takes around 5 to 6 weeks, so it's quite a good turnaround time. So there are certain responsibilities that grantees do have once they do start running the projects. The first of these is participant data. So they need to collect evidence from participants using template forms. They need to enter and upload data and evidence on a monthly basis and provide hard copies of participant files for audit on request. So this is quite a big stipulation of the funding to gather this participant data. This will involve the likes of ID, certain signatures for when they've progressed, and to evidence that. Grant reporting, so reporting after 3 months, delivery on key milestones, targets and budget. Alerting the grant officer to problems. So ideally, it's best to address problems as you go along, so you can deal with them head on, and so they don't just build up for the end of the 6-month period. And like I mentioned before, there's also always the possibility for requesting changes and extensions. So this could be an extension in the time frame, or it could be, for example, someone said that they wanted to target 18 to 24-year-olds, but realize that they're struggling to get participants in that age category, and they may need to open up their bracket of participants, and then again they would have to fill out a change of request form. And then financial evidence, so collecting and recording evidence of expenditures, providing hard copies for audit purposes, and submitting evidence electronically with the reports at 3 months and at the end of the grant. So when receiving the funding, there's certain things that grantees can and can't spend the money on. Eligible costs cover the likes of staff costs, but it's not already funded through other sources. You've got the running costs, so for example, room hire and stationery, and it will need to be shown how these have been calculated. Skills training and other course costs. You've got the administration costs, any capital purchases under £1,000 per item, and cost directly associated with participants. So it could be, like I mentioned, you might be running the project in several cities and you need people to travel out, but they can't afford it, so you can pay for travel costs, childcare, etc. Ineligible costs are core costs of running your organisation or delivering work other than those directly associated with the project. Any costs that are being incurred before the agreed start date, so they can't be covered. Any costs that can't be fully evidenced back to your organisation's nominated bank account. Bank charges and legal fees aren't covered. Items which only benefit individuals, so the likes of prizes or individual kit, it has to be things that can be shared amongst the participants. activities that promote religious beliefs or political activities, or that the state has an obligation to provide. Any fundraising activities can't be covered, and contingency costs. So in terms of if a community grant is right for you, the sort of essential things that are looked at are to have existing access to target participants and access to capable staff. So obviously you need to have capable staff to be able to deliver the project, and it's a source of recruiting participants is needed. To have good existing knowledge of the community you'll be delivering in, because if you know the sort of community you're delivering in, you know what's needed and how you can tailor your services accordingly, and if there's an actual need for the service that you're providing, and to be able to attend the new grant recipient briefing. Desirable is to have previous experience in delivering funding projects successfully. So although this is not necessary, it always helps to have some sort of experience. It makes the process a lot more seamless. And to have previous experience in successfully evidencing spend and participant eligibility for projects. So the sort of questions we kind of come into is, can I apply if I've already received an ESF funding? So if people have applied for ESF funding and they have been able to deliver a successful project, they are eligible to apply again for further funding. What happens if I don't meet my target? So again, this is very case based. If people, the thing that ESF look at is people showing along the journey of the 6 months that they are trying, and that if they run into problems, they're trying to resolve them. Usually in terms of funding, it tends not to get clawed back. It's more a case of if people are really struggling, then they won't get the next lot of payment instead. But a lot of help is given to grantees, and there's lots of flexibility, for example, like I said, with extension and stuff. If you want to find out more information, you can see the application guidance. Like I said, that's a very thorough document. You can sign up for the newsletter, you can contact myself, and there's a technical support available too. Any questions?
I haven't got any question in the chat. I'll tell you what, how about you stop sharing your screen and we can see if, there you go. Welcome back everyone on the screen. Now, I hadn't received any questions ahead of this meeting either. However, if there's anything you'd like to share, now's the time to exchange with us. Yes, Brendan.
Very simple question. Can you, am I muted? Or?
No, you're not.
Right. Can we apply for ESF funding for Solihull? Because you said Coventry and Warwickshire.
Whatever falls under the Coventry and Warwickshire bracket, they're the places that are eligible for the funding.
So does that include Solihull then?
Does Solihull, sorry, my geography is
no, awful. Normally it doesn't.
No, then it wouldn't be, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Are we sure it's not, doesn't include Solihull? I thought there were still funds for Solihull in the ESF. Is it worth double checking, Risa?
Yeah, I'll double check for you. Yeah, I'll double check.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panel, from everybody here? If not, Michelle, would you be okay to take over and talk to us about Tesco grants?
Yes, no problem. Can I just start by saying I did invite Tesco colleagues to come along, so I can't see any names I recognise, but is anyone here from Tesco? I don't want to ignore you if you are. No, okay, that's fine. I didn't think anyone was able to make it, but I wanted to double check. Okay, I'm just going to share my presentation. Thank you very much, Eileen, for organising.
Thank you for joining.
This is what I'm going to cover today. So I'm here talking about the Tesco Community Grants. I just start very quickly by just telling you a little bit about, there we go. So Groundwork, so we are an environmental community charity. So as well as these funds that we help to administer, we do actually deliver projects ourselves. So this is obviously a photo. We do things like gardening clubs, and we also run healthy eating workshops, we help people into employment, we run outdoor play projects. So we do all sorts of different delivery ourselves, but we have recently started working a little bit more on helping to administer these funding schemes. And in fact, I've been working on the Tesco funding since 2016 when it first was launched, initially funded by the carrier bag charge. Just to give you a little bit of background about Tesco, so I'll go back to that one. So Tesco is actually, the funding comes from Tesco the supermarket, as you'd expect, and it's actually, the whole project is administered by Groundwork UK, who are our central body. So they're the umbrella organisation that sit over us, and then there's Groundwork trusts, regional trusts all over the country. And Risa and I work for Groundwork West Midlands, which is the regional trust in the West Midlands. So the Tesco funding is nationwide, and it has had many different guises over the years, and the amount of funding that was available has changed over time. It was previously called Tesco Bags of Help, but in April this year it changed its name to the Tesco Community Grants, and that very much reflects the fact that it's no longer predominantly funded by the carrier bag charge. It's something that Tesco are just committed to funding. And when it changed in April, they also changed the focus of the fund, and it is currently focused on funding projects that support children, young people and families. Tesco, being a supermarket, are also particularly keen to see projects funded that are in some way related to food. So if you're thinking of applying for funding and you've got a few projects and you've got one that's sort of maybe related to food insecurity, or setting up an allotment garden, or setting up cookery clubs, or doing sort of youth work where you're providing sort of free meals over the summer holidays, anything like that, they are particularly interested in, and you're more likely to get the funding quicker if you're applying for some sort of food related project. But even if you're not applying for a food related project, you're still eligible as long as the project in some way supports children, young people and families. So the way that Tesco run their funding is using the blue token scheme. So in every supermarket, so that's the big Tesco's and the smaller expresses, they have voting booths out near the doorways, and you see this lady here, she's got her blue token and she's voting in it. Every customer who shops is offered a token. They were taken away last year because obviously over COVID they were just considered a point of contact which had to be avoided, and they have been brought back in, although at the moment customers are very much offered the token. They don't have to take one if they don't want. And then customers vote on 3 projects, and the one that gets the most votes at the end of 3 months gets £1,500, the second one gets 1,000 and the third one gets 500. So what I'm talking about today is how to apply to be one of those 3 projects in a voting booth at the front of a Tesco store. So I mentioned on this slide about Tesco Regions, and this often comes up with a few queries from groups, so I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So what Tesco have done is they have split the country into regions, and each region contains between 1 and around 20 Tesco stores. They normally have one or 2 big stores in them, and then a handful of expresses. So for example, in the Leamington Warwick region, if you were to apply for funding there, your project would be in the big Tesco store in Warwick, the Metro in Leamington, and then the Express store in Lillington. So every area of the country is covered. Some of the more rural regions, for example, Southam, it just has 1 Tesco in it. In Solihull, Solihull is actually 2 regions. We've got the east and the west, and there's the big stores in each, and then also a handful of expresses in each of them as well. And it's just worth having to think about where your project is being delivered, and that can be, so it's not where your organisation is based, but where your project is being delivered, because Tesco use the customer voting, you need to have a think about where you want to apply to and where you're most likely to get votes from customers. And this is it depends. Some groups, they have a lot of very, very local support, so it is really important that they're in their closest Tesco to where their delivery is taking place. Other groups that it's not quite so important an issue. The way you get allocated into regions is on the application form. It asks you what is your closest Tesco store, and whatever postcode you put there allocates you into that region. But if have got any questions at all about region, it's probably worth you dropping me a quick email just to double check. Just occasionally some people are sort of right on sort of the cusp between two regions. If you're sort of equidistant to two stores, it might be I can tell you that one store's got very high application levels and the other region's got very low application. That might push you towards making an application in a certain region. But for a lot of people, it's very basic. You just put in your local Tesco stores. So who can apply? Tesco, I think, is a really lovely fund in the fact that it is very wide open. So they say any constituted not-for-profit organisation. So that can include voluntary groups, charities, councils, town or parish council or local authorities, schools can apply, hospices, scouts and guides, any sports clubs that have got a sort of formal constitution can apply. And when you apply, you do need to have a copy of that constitution or your governing documents just to upload so that we know, it's basically just so we know you are a genuine organisation. And they have started asking as well, unless you're a charity or a local authority or school, they have actually started asking a few more details on the application. They do need to provide ID as well for the main applicant. It's the usual restrictions for people that can't apply. So if you've applied for lots of grants before, you'll be familiar. We can't fund individuals, we can't fund groups that are just going to distribute money to other groups. Nothing that's going to take place overseas, nothing that promotes a particular religious or political cause. Although saying that, we do fund quite a lot of sort of church groups. So if you're applying from like a church that's sort of running something that's going to benefit children and young people in the community and isn't necessarily you're applying from a religious perspective, then that is eligible. But if you're not sure, then I recommend just giving me a quick call or emailing me, and I'm happy to chat through individual applications. So next, how do you apply? So to apply, you need to go to this website. I was just going, no, that's going on. I was going to put it in the chat, the actual website address, but I can't see the chat at the moment, so I'll do it when I've stopped sharing my screen. So you go to this website and click on the top which says apply for a grant, and this takes you through to the next step of the web page, and there's 3 steps on this one. The first one is guidance notes. So if you've got a question that comes to your head and I've not covered it today, it may well be covered there, so it's worth having a quick read of those. Step 2 is just to help you find your local store, to help you find that postcode you need for the application. And then step 3 is the important one. That takes you to the eligibility check. And that's a tick box form, and it just takes you through some eligibility criteria. So it checks that you are a constituted not-for-profit organisation. It checks that you are looking to fund a project that's supporting children, young people or families. It checks that you, whatever you're applying for, you can deliver it within 12 months. So it takes you through that, and when you get to the end of that, you will see this form. Don't press done. Press apply now. So we do have a few people. If it goes wrong, you can just go through the whole step again. It's a bit frustrating. So you press the apply now button, takes you to an online portal. You put in your email address and you create a password. And that will be the portal you can use to log in and out and see your applications and make adjustments to them. So just a few tips on using the portal. The portal does not work well with Apple technology. So if you're using an iPad, it is not particularly compatible. I have met people that have managed to apply on an Apple computer, but it generally doesn't work very well, and often bits of the form don't format properly, so you do need some sort of Microsoft enabled computer. It also doesn't work very well on Google Chrome for some people, so if you're finding that the form doesn't look right, or there seems to be buttons that are missing, it's best to log on using Internet Explorer or Firefox or a different internet service provider, and you might be able to use it, access it that way. But if you do have any technical issues and you can't resolve it by these methods, do just get in contact. The form also times out quite quickly. So just a general tip, I'd say, for applying, filling in any of these online forms. We've all been there where you've spent hours filling in something and then it all sort of gets lost. I always put it on a Word document and then cut and paste it over. So that's the application form. This is my page of top tips for what to put on the application, and they might sound really obvious. The first one is make sure you mention exactly what you're going to do with the money. On the actual application, the Tesco application, it is actually very short, I think, and quite an easy application to complete, especially compared to a lot of other ones I've seen. The main section where you have to write a narrative about what you're going to do is only 300 words long. So you don't actually have that much space to talk about your project. And so I really sort of want to sort of say how important it is to just give the details on what you're doing. So if, for example, you're going to be running, say you've decided you're going to do some healthy eating cookery clubs for the local community, give a little bit of details. How many sessions are you going to run? How many people do you think you're going to be able to have at your maximum capacity? Are they going to be like once a week? You can even say we're going to run a session every Wednesday for 2 hours. How are you going to sort of advertise it to people? Who's going to run the session? Just give a little bit of detail, and that's because the panels do like to know those details, and they like to see that the project is sort of like you've done a little bit of planning and it is gonna, they know exactly what the money is going to be spent on. The next point is, do say somewhere on that application that your project is supporting children and families or young people, because this is the eligibility criteria, and if you don't mention that, you might think it's obvious, but if you don't explicitly mention that, it may be that your project gets rejected because it might just be judged as not hitting the eligibility criteria. So make sure you put that somewhere on the application. Say why the project is needed. So tell us why you think why the money is needed in the local area. So that might be that, you know, you're running a sports project and you're hoping to tackle sort of growing obesity levels, or it might be that you just sort of want to get the community to sort of have more of a community feel, and you're hoping to get people sort of working together, or it might be it's really targeted and there's a particular group of young people that are suffering bad mental health problems, and you're doing a project that's really targeted at that. But just mention on there why it's needed. And then the next point is, don't feel the need to use too much jargon or statistics. So the Tesco funding goes to a panel, so it's either a panel or at Groundwork UK, or it's a panel of Tesco staff. So that's members of staff from the Tesco stores. So it could be people from the managers all the way down to checkout staff or delivery drivers. So these are the people that you are writing to. So you really need to bear in mind that they are from the local area, they know their local area very well. And so if you, rather than sort of filling your application, it's not a formal selection panel you're going to, so you need to sort of paint a picture of your project. A couple of statistics is fine if like obesity is through the roof in your area, put 95% obesity levels, but don't worry too much about putting too many statistics in there. It's more about the project you're delivering and making sure that they understand what it is you're going to do with the funding. And then the last tip is very specific to the Tesco funding. So it's making sure that your project title and your one-line description are good. And with a lot of funders, project title is not important, but for this particular one it is. And that's because if you remember back to the voting booths, so the three-line the 300-word description, that's what's going to get you sort of selected by the panel. But when it comes to the customer vote, the only thing that the customers are going to see on that voting booth is your organisation's name, your project title, and your one-line description. So you need to make sure that if the customer's sat there reading all the 3 projects, that yours is the one that stands out to them, and yours is the one that they put their blue tokens in your slot. So I've seen, I would give this example, I've seen I remember 2 groups in Worcester applied. They were both pretty much doing the same project. They wanted to set up a lovely community allotment, and one of them called it Worcester Allotments and the other one called it the Secret Garden of Worcester. And the group that called it the Secret Garden of Worcester got more votes and they got more funding. And it wasn't a very different project, it was just their title was better. So that is a little bit important with Tesco funding. On the flip side, it does depend on who you're up against, and there's no way of controlling that. So it may be that the project you're up against is just, if you're up against a project that's supporting like very sick children, it can be hard for you to come first, and there's no way you can control that. One other thing I wanted to mention is that you can apply for revenue or capital. So this is Tesco. It is a lovely fund that they're very wide open in their criteria. So you can apply for staff time and running costs. You can apply for room hire, anything associated with the project you're delivering, and then you can also apply for capital. So for any purchases you need for the project. It can be used as match funding for a bigger project, or it can be just a standalone project on its own. I would say if you are applying for match funding, they do need you to sort of have some evidence that you've somehow, or you've got either you have secured the match or you've got a really good plan in place to secure it, because you have only got that 12 months once you get the funding to deliver it. So you do need to have that in place. There's a lot more information than I've given you today on the guidance notes here, which can also be found on the website. And then there's also me, I'm a resource that you can use. So I'm a Tesco enabler. So I oversee the local region, and there's me and I've got a colleague as well. So we support people through the application process, and then also once you're successful with your grant, if you need any help at that stage, we can also support you. And these are my contact details. The ones at the top are me, and then if you occasionally get people joining these events who aren't actually from the West Midlands, in which case we give them the contact details at the bottom, and that's will get you, if you ask there, you'll get you can find out who the local enabler is in all the different regions. But I believe everyone today is from West Midlands area, so that's fine. There was just a couple of other things I hadn't mentioned. So the first one was make sure you apply for the full £1,500. I know when I showed you the voting booths, there were the 3 different amounts that you could get awarded. And Tesco understand that if you applied for a £1,500 grant and you only get awarded say 500, your project is going to have to be scaled down, and that's perfectly fine. But if you apply for only £500 and you win still vote, you will only get £500, and that's a whole £1,000 you could have got. So apply for the full amount and write your project description as though you're going to be awarded the full amount. And then if you don't get it for some reason, that's a conversation you can sort of have with Groundwork UK about how you can scale back your project, and they're very happy to do that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm just going to put the link to the website in the chat as well. Has anyone got any questions?
Thank you very, very much, Michelle. I think there was one question about sharing your contact details, and you've already answered that, so that's great. Now, I'm aware of some of you present today with some specific questions on your project, so feel free to share that with us, as Michelle is the right person to ask if you're here. Yes, thank you, Michelle, for your details. Any questions from the panel here?
I remembered I didn't give an idea of timescales involved with the Tesco applications. So with Tesco, it's actually, this is one of, I would say, the disadvantages of Tesco. It's very hard to tell you when you will get the funding if you apply. And it very much depends on application levels in your region. We've got some regions of the West Midlands that are very, very low in applications. And if you were to apply now, you would have quite a good chance of getting through to the October, November, December vote. So if you were think you're in the store vote for 3 months and then you get the funding in January. And then we've got other areas of the West Midlands who've got very, very high application levels. And if you apply in one of those, you might be waiting 12 to 18 months to get the funding, because you see only 3 go through every quarter. And if you want to know about application levels in your area, it might be worth just giving me a quick call and I can give you some guidance around that. I would say at the moment, Tesco we're quite low on any food related projects. So for most of our regions in the West Midlands, if you're thinking of applying for something that's in some way related to food or food insecurity, food bank style, or just even a cookery or a gardening project, you've got a good chance of getting the funding pretty quickly if you're applying for one of those types of projects.
Right, if there aren't any questions, there was a question I'd received prior to the event. If an organisation has 2 or 3 different projects, quite distinctive, could they apply for those 3 at the same time, or what would be your advice on that front?
That's a good question. So if they, so one thing to note is you can apply in multiple regions. So for example, if you were to apply, you could apply for the same project in Leamington and Rugby and Solihull. So you can have 3 applications, but you can only have 1 application in every region. So if you're say in Leamington, you can only have 1 application in the Leamington region at any one time. It's hard. It might be best if they contact me directly to sort of chat through their 3 different options, and I can give some advice. At the moment, if it's any way related to food, I'd go with, if there's any of the 3 that are related to food, I'd go with that one. And then with the other one, you have to think about what you think, you know, customers might vote for, or what's your priority project, because you can reapply. If you've already had the funding, you can reapply for more funding, but priority is given to new applicants. So whichever is, like, you're less likely to get the funding with every subsequent application you put in. So whichever is the project you most want to get funding is probably the one that you should apply for first.
Okay. And
sorry, can I also add, if anybody has already applied for Tesco funding, so when it relaunched and changed from Tesco Bags of Help to Tesco Community Grant, any Tesco Bags of Help applications that were on the system and hadn't got funding have automatically been brought into the selection for the community grants. So if you've got an old application, it may well, if it was children and young people related, it will have been brought over. But if you're not sure, then do just drop me an email, and I'm happy to have a look on the system and check if your application has been ported over.
thank you. Thanks, Michelle. There's a question from Lorraine. You mentioned the focus is on children, families and young people and food-related causes, but can other charities with projects outside of these criteria apply? What would be their success rate chance?
It's probably worth, actually, if you've got a project that's outside that criteria, I think the only way you'd probably like to get funding is if you go and speak to your community champion in your local Tesco store. Because you might, if they were to nominate you, you would have a chance of getting the funding. But unfortunately, they are being quite strict. So if you're just putting in an application and it's not in some way related to sort of children and families and young people, then it's unlikely to get the funding. And people have asked me if Tesco are likely to change the focus. It's hard to know because I'm not involved in that kind of level of decision making, but at the moment I would say that they only launched in April and they seem pretty fixed on the children and young people focus at the moment, so I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, and when you talk about families, it's our projects along that would be supporting carers be potentially eligible? So even if it's not a young family.
So did you say carers?
Carers, yes, someone who's caring for.
Yeah, I think it's just really important when you're applying that you make it very clear that how the whole family is going to benefit from the project. So yeah, if you're doing like a project, say, for a group of mothers where you're doing sort of parenting course for mothers, then that's obvious that that will support the whole family. So as long as you sort of make it quite clear on the application form that that's the case, then yes.
Have you seen any projects with an element of supporting people isolating and shielding? Because obviously those are individuals who are not systematically in our community right now on a daily basis. Have you seen any of those type of projects being applied for?
We did have, so during the last year they set up the COVID fund and there was a lot of projects like that. There's no reason why they couldn't. I don't think I've spotted any on the system recently that have been that sort of focused, but there's no reason why there wouldn't be, as long as obviously they're supporting children and families who are isolating or shielding. It is worth bearing in mind though that it can be quite a long lag time between applying and getting the funding for Tesco. So it may be that you're applying now, but you're not going to get into store vote until this time next year, in which case projects that sort of fingers crossed it won't be as relevant then, and you might sort of struggle to get the store votes.
Yes, no, that does make sense. And I suppose these have to be projects that could take place within that kind of time frame. So if your applications were to stipulate it can only be in June 2021 to November 2021, you wouldn't be very likely to be selected in December.
Yeah, it's best to leave it a little bit open. You can put a date on. So if you think now the next store vote is October, November, December, so you won't get the funding until January. So people are often thinking now about applying for a project they want to run at Christmas, but you're already too late. You probably need to think now about applying for a project for next summer, or even, I suppose if you did apply for a Christmas project, you could still run it next Christmas because you've got 12 months to spend the funding. But yeah, it's worth having to think about sort of the timescales, and it is worth, if you're doing a project, say that you want to do a holiday club, it's worth just saying we will run the project in for 4 weeks over the school holidays, and not sort of specify which school holidays you're going to run it over, and then that makes life easier. Because when you get the funding, you can then choose which ones you're going to do yourself.
Yes, and that's, in a way, that's quite a nice little set of funds that you put your application in, and it's not a very complex application process compared to, no disrespect to Raisa for everything you've shared with us, but the European Social Fund is slightly more convoluted to complete. And after 6 months to 12 months, you might end up having the nice surprise of 1,500 coming your way for having been successful.
Yeah, I would say Tesco, it is a nice quick. So if you, it is a nice, easy one. You could probably, hopefully, I'd like to think apply for in an afternoon. There's a little bit of a faff sort of getting all your documents in and all your sort of addresses and things, but it is quite a short one. But then it isn't quite as much funding as Reese's got. So you win some, you lose some.
Brilliant. And anything else you might want to share with us, Michelle or Raisa, on the funds that you've presented?
I think I've covered everything.
I think you've been very comprehensive, Raisa.
No, that's all.
Okay, so I'll share a little bit more from us here at CAVA. If the technical aspects don't let me down, there you go. So thank you very much, both of you, for your presentations. We are going to hold some additional events. However, we haven't put any dates yet. We're looking at more mid-funder with Heart of England, HS2 and Severn Trent. We haven't put any dates yet because we are hoping at the start of the autumn to look at a physical venue, although don't quote me on this because this is all under review based on the changes in regulations. And we're also looking at doing a training session, a knowledge sharing session, specifically on how to start a community group. And we would encourage you to follow us on Eventbrite, as well as to subscribe to our newsletter so that you are aware of those events as soon as we make them available. While they are online, we are not really limited by the number of people attending. Once we start doing them physically again, this may, of course, change. Apart from that, I think from all of us here at CAVA, and from the, thank you very much again, Raisa and Michelle, for joining us from Groundwork. Thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.